Hi, I'm Wes. Welcome to the Building Roots podcast with TreeNewal, and I'm joined here today by Emmett Minnick with Arborist, and we want to talk about plant diseases because coming into the summer and we're in the late springtime, we got a lot of diseases hopping around here, and so we just wanted to have a discussion around what are some of the common ones that we need to be out on the lookout for here. What have you been seeing popping up?
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Wes. Common diseases. So that's the $64,000 question, right?
It kind of depends on the weather.
Yeah. So in my role as a manufacturer's rep, basically, it's kind of interesting. What I tell people, I'm like a pharmaceutical sales rep, but for trees. You're the tree doctor. I'm the pharmaceutical rep.
I like that analogy.
And then the tree's the patient. And so I'll get many tree doctors sending me pictures of sick trees. What's wrong with this? What do I use? And so that this time of year, that's a very common question for me. A blurry picture of a tree, what do I do? And so the thing about North Texas is we are not in an area where we have a lot of leaf disease pathogens. Other areas in the Midwest, like crab apples with apple scab and various other leaf disease, Tabacia leaf spot, leaf anthracnose, bur oak blight, things like that, we don't have here yet for as widespread. I got a picture just the other day that I think was oak anthracnose on a red oak. So right now in the landscape, I would probably have to defer to you since you're out looking at trees more often than me, and I'm just going off of what pictures people send to me.
Well, I think we see a lot of seasonality with our diseases. Starting off in the spring, I think one of the first big ones that we get around here is Entomosporium leaf spot.
Yeah.
It presents as red lesions on mostly Indian hawthorn and on photinias.
Yeah.
They have this succulent, tender new growth that hasn't yet formed a waxy leaf coating, and it's easily infected, and we have these mild temperatures, lots of rainfall, high humidity, clouds, very favorable climate for diseases to develop, for fungal diseases, certain ones. And so we get a rapid increase in the incidence of that disease. When I'm talking to my customers, I explain to them about a disease triangle where you've got a plant host, and you got a plant pathogen, and then you have the environmental conditions that are favorable for development. And I explain to them that when those three come into alignment, that's when we can have a disease. And the longer period of time that those are in alignment, the greater that incidence of disease is going to be. So if we have weeks in a row of mild, damp, wet weather with just the right conditions, we're going to see a lot more of that type of leaf spot.
Right. So the Entomosporium leaf spot, you mentioned India hawthorns. A lot of those have been removed from the landscape after the winter storm in 2021. So don't have to worry too much about those anymore.
I see new ones in landscapes every day.
They're coming back.
Yes.
And then the photinias. Red tips, I still see them around. A lot of those have been removed as well as a result of Entomosporium.
Well, it bleeds them of their energy over time because it causes them to defoliate, which usually the main purpose of a red tip photinia is for screening. And they don't perform their function very well if they're heavily diseased. And they're defoliating, and so the plant has to draw on reserve energy to put out new leaves, and as long as the conditions are still favorable and you've got all that inoculum still on the plant, it's just going to get reinfected and it's going to fall off again. And so over time, the plants just lose all their energy reserves and they become weak and even more susceptible to disease, and it's just self-fulfilling almost.
Correct. And so, that's definitely one that you were going to be seeing now on trees and shrubs. It looks like a lot of people are familiar with black spot on rose, and I'd say Entomosporium looks a lot like black spot.
Yeah, except that it's red and the black spots are black, but they both have a halo.
Yeah.
The Entomosporium has a yellow halo around it, as does the black spot on the rose. That's another common one that we see a lot, and again, weather influenced. And another big one that we see weather influenced is powdery mildew. Mm-hmm. Now it's usually a little later in the year. The Entomosporium is kind of one of our kickoff diseases, and then we start to see the powdery mildew as it starts to warm up. We see it a lot in mid to late spring and in the earliest parts of summer when we still have humidity and rainfall typically, but the temperatures are a little higher. You've probably seen it on crepe myrtles. We see it on oaks.
Yep.
What else have you observed it on?
With powdery mildew, I'd say crepe myrtle is probably the main thing I've seen that on. And this very well could be a good year for that disease. As you said, the environmental leg of the disease triangle. Listening to the weatherman the other day, we're in the month of May, which happens to be the rainiest month in DFW. So we've got rain in the forecast for the next couple of weeks. Cloudy, coolish weather. That's all perfect for disease development.
People are going to be able to look out for white fuzzy fungal growths on the leaf surface, sometimes on the bottom of the leaf. On the oak trees, it can be on either the top or the bottom. On the crepe myrtles, sometimes it'll take over the whole shoot. The shoots of new growth that are real tender and easily infected, the whole thing will look just kind of moldy almost. And it'll even cover the flower buds. And when the flower buds get covered, they just don't open. And if your crepe myrtle's infested with crepe myrtle bark scales and powdery mildew, it's not going to be a very good looking plant.
No. And is that something where people can, have an impact on that environmental leg by reducing their irrigation?
That's a big one. I see a lot more problems with overwatering our plants rather than underwatering.
Right.
And I think that we're shooting ourselves in the foot and making the climate even better for a lot of these fungal diseases.
Right. And so being aware of what's coming out of the sky in terms of precipitation and also the drainage of a property, those are two, if you're in a property that has poor drainage or you have clay soils that's going to hold a lot of water. I know we're talking about leaf pathogens, powdery mildew and entosporium. However, doing your part as a homeowner to reduce that irrigation when it's not necessary is very important in disease management.
I agree. And it can lead to lots of different types of problems. Another big one that's not leaf related that we see in our service area, typically kicking off late May, early June, we start to see a lot of oak trees declining from root diseases. We have a lot of post oaks in our area. Sandy soil that's typically coarse textured, and I consider post oak kind of a site indicator. When you see post oaks, generally you can assume that at least the top layer of soil is pretty sandy and highly aerated. And these trees have a certain set of adaptations. They're not adapted to wet peat. They don't like being irrigated 3, 4, 5 times a week, and it weakens them, stresses them out. And this is about the time of year when we start to see the effects of the root rot hitting them.
Right. So this, with the post oaks, this has been going on, I want to say since like 2015, 2016 is when
I started seeing it.
That was an extremely wet spring and early summer. We had like flooding. Yes. I live over by Lake Louisville or Lake Dallas, I guess, depending on where you're at. And I remember going over to the marina and taking some pictures of how high the water was. And that's when we started to see this problem with the post oaks and what Texas A&M has deemed rapid decline of post oak. That's how most diseases are.
Name.
Yeah, that's how most diseases are named. Just whatever the host is and whatever the symptom is, that's the name of the disease. Oak wilt, for example. And so it's actually a kind of a complicated issue. If we have to rewind and we have to think back like more than 10 years. So if we go back to 2011, 2012, we had some super dry years. 2011 was awful. And what happens with these trees during the really, really droughty times is, and what a lot of people don't consider, if it doesn't rain for months and months and months and that soil desiccates and dries out in that top foot, all of the absorbing roots in there dry out and die. And so you have this large organism, a native post oak that's been growing there for 100 plus years. Well, it goes through this 2 years of drought and it loses a lot of its absorbing roots. And then we move into some years of really heavy rainfall that saturates the soil. And to your point, the root rot, which is what you're referring to as Phytophthora root rot, that's a specific type of disease that loves wet. It needs water. And so when that soil stays saturated, the Phytophthora flares up, and it also affects the root system. And so you kind of get in this really difficult situation where the tree's dying from lack of water, even though the soil is saturated.
Yes.
And so it can be very, very challenging. And so that's how it kind of started. But then now how it's going is where we have areas of post oak, people love to plant St. Augustine grass under it. And I think there's some mismanagement happening of the turf grass, which is exacerbating issues with these trees. And then so, like I said, the tree's dying from lack of water, even though you're watering it. Well, what happens is your evapotranspiration demands increase as we move into warmer weather. That's when those trees start to brown out is kind of what people call the symptom.
It's difficult to explain that to customers. They have a hard time understanding that the tree's dying from drought stress because the soil's too wet. And I have to explain to them that your root system is not functioning, and that's why it's getting drought stress, because we see drought stress symptoms on the tree. The first thing we notice is that it starts to get off color. The tree looks nice and green, and then the next thing you know, you look out the window and it's just kind of a pale green. And that's your first clue. And then they start to progress to leaf drop and starting to turn yellow, and then the leaf drop accelerates, and then all of a sudden the tree turns brown and the leaf drop stops, and those leaves stay attached to the tree because that tree is dead.
How long of a process is that?
That can be as quick as a couple of weeks, sometimes even less. I've had customers report to me that it only took a week, that they called when it started to turn pale green, and by the time I got there, that tree was dead.
Yeah.
At first, when we started to see this, I was trying to save the infected trees. And after failing over and over and over, I realized this is not going to work. And I had to change my approach. And what we do now is we try to save the adjacent trees.
Right.
And we try to coach on watering. You're right. The environmental conditions did create a perfect storm for this. We went from a historic drought to the wettest year on record, and it's like this head snapping change of direction for a tree that's been there 100 years. And they don't like that. And as you said, a lot of the roots were dead. The tree is stressed. It's already immunocompromised because of this terrible drought, and now all of a sudden it's getting hit with these opposite conditions that are equally bad for it, if not worse, and they start succumbing to the disease. That definitely describes the pattern that I saw.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing the same things in the same time period. But that disease is lethal. And once you see the symptoms, unfortunately, it's too late.
Right.
So where I think that we've kind of missed as an industry is getting word to our customers that it's so important to be proactive with plant health. Often we're reactive. We don't get calls until there is a problem, and it's harder to fix a problem than to prevent a problem. And I think that this disease in particular is a microcosm of that, and very, very illustrative of that concept that it's important to be out in front on plant health diseases. And our fungicides even, they work much better as preventatives than they do as curatives.
Right. So do you guys have a proactive program for post oak owners?
We do. One of the most important things you can do, we call it TNP. It stands for TreeNewal process. And we are putting fertilizers into the soil, but we're also putting soil conditioners into the soil that are improving the quality of that soil. It's going to help the tree benefit for a much longer period of time than just applying synthetic chemical fertilization. Once that tree that's been fertilized has used up the fertilizer, and that fertilizer is gone, the tree doesn't have any lasting benefit from it. But the soil conditioners and our rooting hormone actually help increase the quality of the soil around the tree, which is going to increase the tree's health long term. We encourage that on any tree that you value, just because it creates such a good environment for the roots to develop. And as we know, the trees get almost all of their resources from the soil. And so it's very important to have that healthy interaction between the soil and the root system.
Have you treated or experimented using the potassium phosphate products?
We do use that. We use it partly as a soil injection. We also use it as a bark spray to suppress Phytophthora, to try to stimulate the immune response of the tree. We do like that product and use it quite a bit for that purpose, as well as another disease that we get that comes from Phytophthora cankers. Mm-hmm. Those cankers are the little sores on the side of the tree. It's kind of how I'll describe them to customers. That they bleed black looking sap that smells sour.
Yep.
It's under there killing that cambium tissue and that phloem, which creates a lot of problems for the tree. And we use that phosphate product frequently for that.
Okay, yeah, that's a good management approach, and I believe somebody with Texas A&M may have put out a kind of a protocol with these post oaks, which was using, I think, various different Phytophthora type fungicides as soil injections to treat and help recover these trees, or, as you said, treat the preventative treatments for the ones that aren't dead.
Yes. We're trying to stimulate the immune response, improve the soil health, coach them on watering, talk about not watering our St. Augustine 3 or 4 days a week, because that's a big problem.
Right. And so with diseases, managing cultural practices are extremely important. So back to the disease triangle, you have to have a virulent pathogen, you have to have a susceptible host, and you have to have a conducive environment. And so what can we manage in this triangle? The environment. And so if we can reduce how hospitable the environment is to the disease, it's going to go a long ways. And so with St. Augustine lawns, here's two tree guys talking about grass. St. Augustine does not require as much water as people think it does. And the biggest problem that I see with that turf is people mow it too low. People want to mow it like a Bermuda lawn, which is typically 1.5 inches or 1 inch long, maybe 2 inches. St. Augustine wants to be like 3 to 4 inches in height.
Yes.
And if you mow it taller, that grass is going to be a lot hardier and require actually less water. And so why it looks sick is because people mow it so low and they scalp it, and that's what's stressing the grass out, and they think they need to add more water to the grass. I agree
wholeheartedly. I have post oaks in my yard. I've got 7 big ones in my backyard. I got 3 more in my front yard. And I'd be sick if I lost one of them on my watch. And I've got St. Augustine. Mm-hmm. I mow my St. Augustine at 3.5 inches every day or every week, all summer long. And I've trained that grass to be drought tolerant, because that promotes, or that creates a less hospitable environment for these pathogens in the soil around my trees.
Right.
And so by managing the St. Augustine more effectively, we can create better conditions for our trees.
Yeah, and so back to turf management. So I'm not just a tree guy. So I have a bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in crop science. And I've been in plant healthcare since 2010. So I guess 13 years now. But when grass gets drought stressed, it actually signals to that plant to grow more roots. There's a hormonal response in the grass to strengthen its root system. And so what we end up seeing in the urban environment, and it's very common from Texas all the way up through the whole United States, is people love to water their grass. And so this grass never gets stressed in the springtime. And so it develops a very shallow root system. And then when your ET or your evapotranspiration increases in the summer months, now you're having to water more and more because that grass never had the chance to develop a dense root system.
Yes.
And so it's important this time of year, even before now, to let that grass stress out. It's going to be okay. We stay pretty mild through the month of May. We get pretty good rainfall here. And so let that grass deal with it and develop a denser root system. And we also have 2 names on my shirt. The other name is Ecologel Solutions. And that's a line of lawn care products, basically. 2 technologies that we're really proud of. One is called Hydratane, and one is called Cytogrow. Cytogrow is concentrated seaweed extract. It contains a hormone called cytokinins, and that hormone stimulates root development. And so that's a really good product to help drive that deeper root system. And then the hydrotane product actually extends the availability of moisture in the soil. And so it, in a nutshell, it is reducing evaporative loss of water out of the soil. And so it can extend your time between irrigations. And so rather than people having to water, or what they think, 3 to 4 times a week, you can get equal performance from half as much irrigations.
And that's helpful for our trees. And I agree. I tell my customers they've got to give their grass a little tough love to make it root deep so that they don't have to water it so often, which is better for their trees. So I think what we're seeing here is that the way the grass is managed, the way the trees are managed, it's all kind of one ecosystem on that property, and that you got to look at it holistically.
It's part of the equation, you know, and if me and you had our way when it comes to trees, those post oaks would have a no grass underneath them at all.
Mulch layer.
It would just be a mulch layer all the way out to the edge of the canopy, and that tree would be happy, and we'd be happy, and we'd sleep really well at night. However, that's a dream world, and you know, you go to some really nice homes, and the lawn is manicured, and if the St. Augustine wasn't bad enough, now we're going to have flower beds installed underneath the trees.
Hydrangeas and azaleas and all kinds of little flowers.
I can see the emotions on your face. Yeah, so all the annuals and things like that, and those are water-loving plants. And you started off on post oaks by saying that they don't like wet feet.
They do not.
And so many of our native trees here are dry site species. So they like, everything needs water, but dry site species means it wants time to dry out between irrigations. It doesn't want to stand in that water. And so you're going to see problems on pretty much any of our oak species around here. If people want to water that much, they should probably install bald cypress species, because those are gonna love it.
Yeah, and it just leads to more root diseases and stress on trees.
Right.
Another one, you actually mentioned this one a little earlier, is one of the ones we don't see a whole lot that you see in the Midwest, but I do see it around here, specifically on oaks. It was Tubacia leaf spot. Mm-hmm. And I see it typically in later summer as we kind of progress on.
Yes. And
we get into late July and August. I mostly see it on post oaks and on our shoe-marred red oaks and other associated red oaks. It presents as little small, round, almost BB-sized lesions on the leaf surface. But one particular plant that I actually didn't recognize what it was because it presented so differently was on a blackjack oak.
Okay.
And I took some samples and I sent it in. It almost looked like major drought stress. Mm-hmm. With a lot of scorch around the margin of the leaf and the whole leaf almost turning brown and getting crunchy. But that's not a plant that you would normally expect to see major drought stress on, especially in an irrigated yard. It's a native drought-tolerant species. You commonly find it associated with post oaks, cedar elms, eastern red cedars, Chittam woods. So it's a adapted native species. But I was seeing these symptoms that look like drought stress, and wanting to know what it was, I sent it in, and the lab identified it as Tubacia. It had a pretty profound effect on the health of those trees. Normally with the post oaks and the red oaks where I see it, we get some leaf drop, but it's not typically a huge leaf drop that contributes negatively to plant health. It's more of a nuisance. But on these blackjacks, it was actually a pretty big problem.
Yeah, Tubacia, and that can be a tough one to get under control. So tree disease management in the landscape in general, diseases are much more difficult to control than our insect pests. Insects are easy. You give me a bug, I can probably tell you how to kill it. Diseases require much more intensive management, and timing is critical of your applications.
Absolutely.
Because by the time you're seeing this on your blackjack, or when somebody may call you about the post oak, whenever you're seeing those symptoms, it's kind of too late.
Right.
And so an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is kind of what you were talking about earlier. The thing with Tubacia leaf spot or leaf anthracnose, those aren't going to kill a tree the first time you notice it. And so after you diagnose that, then you can put together a program and be proactive. Really, the next year is what you're going to be trying to work on. And so, when we're talking about controlling the environment, that becomes harder to do for canopy or leaf diseases. A lot of that's going to be maybe it's an understory tree where it's not getting a lot of air movement or a lot of sunlight and so it's staying more humid there, and that disease can take hold, and so it becomes more difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you. Often it's once you're seeing symptoms, it's past the time at which you can control it, and at that point, now we're just doing damage control. How profoundly did it affect the tree? What can we do to improve the health and the vitality of the tree to help it recover? And then is there anything that we can do to help prevent it next time that the conditions are favorable?
Yeah.
Because we know these things are all cyclical and they're going to come back around.
So often when those symptoms present themselves, if somebody, again, they send me a picture, what I'll recommend at that time is the use of our product Shortstop, which is a growth regulator for trees. Mm-hmm. And that seems kind of like, well, why do you want to use a growth regulator on this? And I can geek out on this pretty hard because that's what my master's thesis was on, growth regulators in cotton. I won't go that deep.
Did they use paclobutrazol on cotton?
No, they use other growth regulators, but they're all they do similar things. They change the hormone production of the tree, and so it's a very unique way to treat a tree because it changes some physiological processes and some morphology of the tree. And so that's why I recommend a growth regulator initially. So you're seeing the symptoms, somebody wants something done to help their tree, and this is something, it's kind of a long game approach. So one application of Shortstop will persist for 2 to 3 years in our environment. And what that does is it reduces the production of a hormone called gibberellic acid that is responsible for stem elongation. And so the reason I'd recommend this for a disease control application is when that hormone gets down-regulated, other processes get up-regulated. And some side effects of the treatment is you're going to have smaller leaves with a thicker, waxier cuticle. And so back to our disease triangle, susceptible host. So what Shortstop is doing, it is making that host less susceptible because we up-regulate defense compounds as well. And so it can be a useful tool in the management of certain diseases. And so that's often a recommendation that you can do when you see those symptoms. And then the next spring is when you can come in with your disease control product to help with that virulent pathogen side of the disease triangle.
Right. So the side effects of the paclobutrazol are actually beneficial. You're getting a reduction in the growth, but the tree's kind of redirecting that energy into other things that are beneficial to the tree, one of which is disease resistance.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. It's exciting to see the way the new products and the new technologies have come along to help us attain our goals of plant health.
Right, and so the growth regulator, that's to me, I think it's one of the most underutilized tool in an arborist toolbox, and I think there's some trepidation there. You're talking about a growth regulator. Why would I want to stunt a tree? And so having a knowledge of that, and kind of what I've seen as I've made those recommendations to people is they start to use it, and then they see the results of it, and then they start to use more of it because it's pretty fascinating how it works and the benefits of that tool. Yes.
Well, we have a lot of things in our toolbox for disease control. Growth regulators is one of the newer ones that we've used for that. Our fungicides have changed a lot over time. We've gone from just having contact fungicides to having locally systemic fungicides to even some fully systemic fungicides that have broad spectrum. And it's really also been enlightening to see how the research shows how much our management practices on the property affect our diseases.
Right.
And so we have to look at the whole big picture when we're talking about disease management. We have to utilize all of these things in our toolbox. There's no silver bullet that's going to take care of everything. We can't control the environment and Mother Nature and what she's throwing at us. So we've got to kind of use every tool in our tool belt to manage these situations.
All right, so I'm gonna turn the table on you for a second for something that I've been seeing. Actually, two things I've been seeing. Number one, right now I've been getting some calls on magnolias. Are you seeing anything in particular with magnolia trees right now?
I have seen some algal leaf spots. On magnolias. Is that what you've seen?
Really, what I'm getting pictures from people, and it's like, man, all the leaves are falling off of this thing. Is that related to the algal leaf spot, or is that just your normal? Hey, the old leaves are falling off because
they're
trees
cyclical
lose their leaves,
right? They don't maintain those leaves forever. The new leaves are much more efficient at creating energy for the plant. So an evergreen like that is going to shed leaves periodically, and most of my customers complain that magnolias seem to shed all the time.
Yeah.
But I do see them dropping leaves. They'll get these little speckles on the leaf surface. It almost looks like a fungal leaf spot, but it's actually caused by an algae.
Interesting.
And that's one that I've noticed around here when we've had the right kind of weather conditions. I also notice on magnolias that they drop a lot of leaves when they get drought stressed. But you have to be able to differentiate between what's causing the leaf drop. Is it normal? Is it drought stress? Or is it some kind of a leaf spot? So magnolias are generally more of the disease-resistant trees. So if we're getting some kind of a fungal issue on there, I'd be interested to know what that was.
Okay.
I'd share some of those pictures with me.
Yeah, I'll get some. The other thing that I'm sure you've seen is on Leland cypress and Italian cypress.
Oh, yes.
That's probably my number one thing that gets. I got a picture this morning of an Italian cypress, and so I think we really need to cover those topics.
Right. So you're talking about ceridium canker.
Yes.
Ceridium canker is a terrible disease that affects a lot of plants in the cypress family. It attacks the vascular tissue and the cambial tissue under the bark, creates these sunken, discolored cankers on the sides of the trunk, on the branches, and it causes some pretty significant, what do we want to say, visual damage, aesthetic damage on the trees, and then over time it starts to take a real toll on their health. Yeah,
So we've got Italian cypress and Leland cypress, and those trees get canker diseases for different reasons. So we're going to start with Lelands. Lelands are water-loving trees.
Native to the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, and here we are in Texas, and I think a lot of people have realized that it's not a good landscape tree. Now they are beautiful trees when they're healthy. They look great. But what I've been noticing with them is when they get drought stressed, that's when ceridium canker flares up. And actually at my HOA, I noticed a section, shame on me, I didn't say anything, but I noticed things, we're tree guys.
Sure.
And so I noticed things. I noticed a section of the HOA, it looked like the irrigation was broke because I saw some of the signaling plants showing drought stress first. And I didn't say anything. But what ended up happening, the Lelands that were in that same area, I saw them start to fade, which is a symptom, or flag is another symptom. So flagging is when you have one dead branch kind of scattered through the canopy.
Right.
So they started to flag, and then within, I'd say this was over the course of a month. I think it was in July a few years ago. Over the course of the month, those trees died completely because that irrigation was broke. The ceridium canker flared up, and it just took over the whole tree very, very quickly. And so with Lelands, it is a drought problem, which is kind of the opposite of what we've been talking about with these other tree pathogens where we've been saying, hey, cut the watering. With Lelands, you actually need to
increase
the watering because they want more water. And then with Italian cypress, it's the opposite. Italian cypress are native to Italy, which is rocky and arid. And so here we are in Dallas where we have clay soils that are not as well drained, and
then double the annual rainfall to where they're native.
And then you've got the bedding, the annuals and the azaleas and the hydrangeas and the irrigation problems that we were talking about earlier. And so with Italian cypress, it's the opposite problem.
Right.
They need to be not only planted in the right area, that's what I see a lot of times, is they're planted up next to a house by the wall or next to a pool along the fence for screening. And again, these are beautiful trees when they're healthy, but they plant them in these areas and they landscape underneath them and they water them. And then all of a sudden you get these cankers and it turns into a very ugly tree.
Or you get the downspout discharging right at the base of the Italian cypress. And next thing you know, it goes up in flames.
Those two things are super common, but also challenging to fix.
Yeah, we don't really have a great chemical control for that disease. It's a shotgun approach.
Yeah.
A lot of times the flares are buried on these trees. They're dropping organic matter constantly out of the canopy and it accumulates under there and it has to be cleaned out, or they're buried too deep from being planted too deep or mulched too high. And you get all of these layers of stress start to pile up on them. I find that they generally come from the nursery looking fantastic, but in the nursery, all of the inputs can be controlled and you can create a perfect environment for a tree.
That's why it's called a nursery.
That's right. They're in the business of selling good looking plants and they're good at it. Well, you take it out and you put it in a landscape and now all of a sudden you can't control all those inputs and factors. And so they maintain that health for a while, but they start to lose that momentum after a few years in the landscape. And that's when you start to see them decline and become more and more susceptible.
Yeah,
and the best looking Italian cypress I see are the ones that are in unirrigated areas.
Like a cemetery?
Or a cemetery, they do good. And I've told customers from years ago, just cut the water off. And then I drive by later and they still look pretty good until we have one of these wet years. Mm-hmm. And then they struggle for a while.
So on the Italian cypress, what do you think? So like the freeze in 21, and then we had a pretty cold snap this winter as well. How do you think that impacted them negatively?
So I think that they're being a Mediterranean species, they also can be a little sensitive to some cold. And not that it will kill them outright just because it gets cold, but I think it can cause these little injuries, little small injuries. And then you have wet soils in the spring and that can create some stress. And I think that allows that pathogen to get a foothold in there, and it accelerates the development of the disease on the species.
Okay.
One of the worst years I remember was 2016, because we had a very, very wet year, as we discussed earlier. I think it was actually our wettest year on record, and we had over 60 inches of precipitation. And so the trees were already stressed. The Italian cypress, we had a warm fall. It stayed warm, and then all of a sudden the temperature dropped off sharply in early December. And so there wasn't a hardening off period. And that created more wounds on these trees. But nothing happened yet. It was like lighting the fuse on a bomb.
Okay.
And that fuse went on until it started to warm up in late February, and then the bomb went off. And I got calls for Italian cypress every day for nearly 6 months.
Yeah. And
it was like an epidemic of Ceridium cankers. And I think it was just a perfect storm scenario for that species. And it's almost like it just never really recovered fully in our area.
Yeah, a lot of them were removed from the landscape that year, for sure. And then on the Leland cypress, those, I don't know, so that's always been an issue that I've seen with the Ceridium canker, but it seems like right now driving around, I see an awful lot of Lelands that are looking really poor.
Absolutely, and I've observed the same thing as you. It's a water-loving species. It's native in the Pacific Northwest, and it doesn't fare as well when we have real brutal Texas summers. And last year was pretty rough.
Yeah, it was.
So I think we're going to see a lot of symptoms on those.
Yeah,
this year.
And the consideration on that is as those trees get larger in size, their demands for water increase as well.
Absolutely.
And so I've talked, something I've been playing around with again is the growth regulator. One of the other side effects of that treatment is it does enhance fibrous root development. And so again, we're blocking that growth pathway. The tree has to redirect its energy, and one of those places is fibrous root development. And it also helps with drought tolerance. There's another hormone called abscisic acid, which is responsible for, or one of the things it's involved in is stomatal regulation. Told you I can geek out on this stuff. Basically, when you have it upregulates the abscisic acid, it helps that tree be more efficient with its water. And so more roots, more efficient with the water. So it's something I'm playing around with, seeing some positive results from it compared to untreateds. Yeah. But I think that, again, with diseases, prevention is better than cure. And if you've got a tree that's covered up in these cankers, you might be looking at a replacement. I know my HOA ended up replacing, like, all around it. They had lelands and they got large. You know, the HOA is like 20 some odd years old. And so these trees were large. They took out a bunch and they've planted a bunch of new trees. And one of the trees I recommended was an Arizona cypress, as they were replacing that and putting in something else for screening.
Yeah. So we talked about a lot of things today. We talked about a lot of different disease problems that are common around here and some of the hot ticket items right now. We've talked about some different methods of control and what can homeowners do to help control their portion of that disease triangle. And it's been a really interesting talk. I've had a good time talking about these diseases. It's fun to hear what other people's experiences are going around, and it's been another good episode here on building roots with Emmett, and really enjoyed having you here today. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to doing this again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wes.
Thank you.